Couple of things just to get started. Okay, so first, outside material. When I say like we're integrating outside material, working with outside material, we're talking about anything that you're using or writing about that's not from you, like it's from some other source. It's from your books and your articles and that kind of stuff. So the 3 ways you can integrate outside material, we talked about this just a second ago, or listed them: quoting, paraphrasing, summarizing. So quoting, writing to repeat, we're all familiar with that. Presenting ideas and wording of a source unchanged from the original. You put quotation marks around it, you do an in-text citation, you put it in the works cited, right? Cool. Paraphrasing is writing to translate. You would use this to present the ideas of a source, the ideas unchanged, but expressing them in your own writing style, in your own words, or in the style that best matches the genre you're working in. So matching the style of your annotation and how you're having to write that. You don't put quotation marks around it, but you're still going to cite it. You would still have a signal phrase. In a paper, you would still have a signal phrase and you would still have an in-text citation. It would still go in the works cited because it's the idea. So this is the language. This one is the idea, right? So even if you put it in your own words, and you can tell, like, paraphrasing is usually like something you might quote, but you're going to put it in your own words, right? And we do this, and to translate means we either want it to match the style so it's not jumbled, or we want it to be more digestible. We want to make it more understandable, because sometimes when you're pulling from like certain text, the writing, your reader might not understand that. So you're going to put it in your own words so your readers understand it better. And a paraphrase is going to be about the same length as a quote. Like this might be like 2 sentences you would, directly quote, and a paraphrase might be like your own wording of what would normally be a quote, but it's going to be about the same length. It's a passage that you're pulling from. Sorry. Summarizing is different. It's writing to condense, and that's what you're doing. You are kind of, putting things in your own words and paraphrasing these ideas, but you want to think about it as being writing to condense. You're wanting it to be the most important ideas of a source in briefer form and in your own style. So kind of coming back to that paraphrasing a little bit. So putting it in your own words, but boiling it down. You do not put quotation marks, but you still put it in the works cited. So if you even reference, like in a paper, a documentary, and you explain what the documentary was about, you still put that in your works cited because you referenced it in your paper. So if you reference it at all, regardless of which of these 3 it is, it goes in the works cited section. So just make sure you're kind of thinking about that. And again, in the annotated bibliography, you don't need in-text citations or things like that because you're summarizing, you're boiling things down into briefer form, and you are, trying to condense it, and you already have a bibliographic citation there. So you wouldn't do an in-text citation for summarizing. And here's, I guess, one way to think about why you wouldn't. When you're paraphrasing, you're pulling a certain passage from that article. When you're summarizing, you're talking about the whole article. There's no place you're pulling it from. So you don't necessarily, like in MLA, you would show the page number you got it from. Well, you don't have a page number to show because you're talking about the whole thing. So there's no in-text citation required for a summary. Okay, so some of the problems with quoting that we'll come back and we'll talk about this again when we get into the digital essay and put it in a different context of writing in that style. A couple of problems we run into are overquoting, quoting too little. So either doing it way too much, not having enough, quoting for the wrong reasons, because not everything is quotable, and there's not always there are right times to quote, and there are right types of material to quote. So it can be really tricky, and it takes practice figuring out and being able to make decisions about what is worth quoting, what isn't, and when is the right time to do it, and when should you be paraphrasing. What happens when you're relying on quotes and kind of overdoing it is think about it. If you have ever listened to a conversation where everybody's talking at the same time, it gets pretty confusing. Rather than having if someone walked up to your conversation and they said, "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" and everybody started trying to say everything in their own words, that would get pretty jumbled. But you would have one person probably recap what everybody's saying, one style, one wording. It'd be so much easier to understand, right? And having things in different styles. If you're looking through a Wikipedia article, if they didn't have a very rigid style for everybody to write in, and everybody, all of those people contributing were allowed to write in their own style, it would be a cluster. You wouldn't be able to understand what's going on because it would be all these different styles matched together. So that's something to think about. It seems like it's going to ramble and possibly lack focus, and ideas are going to be choppy. You're going to be bouncing from one thing to another. And a lot of times when we quote, you really have to pay attention to having only the things you're going to talk about and having only the exact necessary information when you're quoting. If you have these long pieces of information, you've got a lot of extraneous details in those quotes, and that's why it starts to seem like it lacks focus. It may have a lot of unnecessary material included, and it makes it really difficult for the reader to follow what's important and what's not. It also inadvertently, whether you realize you're doing it or not, we talked about having personal ethos and being credible and knowledgeable, and part of that is also a confidence. And when you over rely on quotes, it inadvertently reveals or sends a message that you have a lack of self-confidence in what you know about the issue, or a lack of knowledge on the issue. If you and I were talking about your research, you would probably be able to just talk to me, well, I read this, and I saw this, and this is what they said, and you could put it in your own words, and that shows me you read and you understand, right? And it does the same thing for your reader when you can put things in your own words. If you're constantly having to look back and read me what you found in your articles and just read it back to me word for word, that maybe shows me that you didn't read it or that you didn't understand it. And it's going to do the same thing for your reader. When you put things in your own words, it shows that you have knowledge on the issue and that you're not relying on other sources to do it for you. Okay, so times when it would be good to quote are to establish authority from an expert. So you're talking about this scholar who makes this point or has this piece of evidence and shows what you're going to say. And then of course you would want to show their words, because you don't want it to be hearsay, I swear this scholar supports what I say. You would want to say, in this article, so-and-so states, or their research suggests, and then say, for example, they state, and use a quote. If you're going to give example or illustration that you're going to talk about, you're going to explain. So an example from a recent event, you might quote from that to pinpoint a controversy, like a study result that shows a surprising trend, prove something that you're going to talk about. Again, talking about it is a key element, and we'll do a little bit more of that when we get to the digital essay. Or create dramatic effect. We all have our favorite quotes that we remember because they are eloquent and thought-provoking. So sometimes we'll quote for those reasons. But these are the reasons to quote. If it's common facts, bland, not what I call bland information, reporting information, dates, definitions, events, facts, those kinds of things you would not quote. Because typically you're just reporting them. You're not going to talk about them or use them to prove anything, illustrate anything, back up anything, talk about. You're not going to talk about it. You don't really need it to prove something. So right now we're going to again talk about this more when we get to the digital essay. But right now, a couple of main points to pull from this are: it's never a good idea to rely on quotes to do the work for you. Quotes are there to support and illustrate points you have already made. So you say it first, then you pull the quote in to back you up or to illustrate what you just said. But you always say it first. When you're doing summaries for this annotated bibliography, summaries are about boiling points down to the gist. Quotes are extra illustration and evidence. They are extra. They are details. Again, you've already said it. The quote backs you up or illustrates what you've just said. That's not needed in a summary because you want conciseness, not extra details. Paraphrasing builds, one, for class and for research, paraphrasing and having to put things in your own words and explain it in your own way. It builds your understanding as the researcher, and it shows what you know or what you're learning. If you're relying on quotes to do that for you brings your credibility or what you're learning into question, whether it's intentional or not, whether you mean to do it or not. As a reader, I don't know what's in your head or what went on behind the background. I only know what I see. And quotes, relying on quotes, especially in such a short piece, sends that message. If you know what the source is about, you should be able to explain the gist quickly in your own words without relying on quotes to do it for you. Again, if you're copying and pasting quotes from the source and putting them into an annotation, you're not summarizing what that source is. You're letting that author summarize their own piece. So it's important to put it in your own words.